I think the first question I have, before we get into kind of into like the foundation and kind of the work you're doing there and the state of the open source projects in light of sustainability, I'm just curious on your vision of sustainability. Like what does sustainability mean to each of you? Maybe Bryan, we can start with you.
Oh, wow. So I saw the notes before this, and I was actually trying to think of a really good answer, and it failed me, so I'm just going to come off the cuff.
Okay.
When I think of open source sustainability, I don't think about any particular piece of software. I think of whole ecosystems of software. So like we're in the cloud native ecosystem, but there's also, you know, the web development, whether it be React or Angular or something else. Making sure that, one, that there is enough projects to make people feel satisfied. Two, that those projects have some type of governance, whether it's from a company or a governing group or a group of people, to make sure it exists. And then three, making sure that when people come into ecosystems, they have what they need to be able to be successful, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm. Dan?
I would say that what we're doing here in the cloud native ecosystem at KubeCon, CloudNativeCon Open Source Summit, in this whole community, is building the infrastructure for the next several decades. And so I think it's a huge issue and concern to say, hey, some of the critical aspects of that infrastructure are not getting the funding and the support that they need to. And you may know that I co-founded the Core Infrastructure Initiative inside the Linux Foundation 5 years ago after Heartbleed, when we found that OpenSSL was not getting the investment that it needed, and we were able to pull together several $1 million from a lot of the biggest technology companies and help support that. But it remains a huge challenge that there are really critical projects and libraries and upstream dependencies and such that are not getting the investment that they need. And so the Linux Foundation is looking at projects like Community Bridge, where we're looking with GitHub at their sponsors program. And then we have really the whole point of foundations like the Cloud Native Computing Foundation is that when a group of companies come together and say, hey, this is really important for us, we think that this infrastructure, that this software matters, that they can come together and fund it and support it and pull together a community. So we just had a really pretty neat example of that last week where starting about 6 months ago, the Kubernetes Product Security Committee, I think that's the name, Project Security Committee, commissioned a security audit. And the initial results of that have come back, and you're starting to see the CVEs be issued and the fixes and such. And that was $250,000 that CNCF was able to invest in it. And that money is essentially the profits from KubeCon. And so because there's so many people that want to come to these events, because the sponsors want to back it, that we're able to run these events and actually run them at a profit, and then take that profit and invest it back into the projects to help them be more successful.
Bryan, I'm curious from your point of view how you view the people angle. You know, you talk about the governance, right? And when you look at the governance, I mean, the CNCF has a governing board, and then the governing board elects the technical oversight committee. And you know, in the governing board, there have been efforts, I think, you know, to add more people to the governing board. And then the technical oversight committee is also looks like it's growing. I'm curious on your viewpoints on the people who are shaping it and how that the people shaping these, you know, the governance itself affects sustainability of the overall organization.
So I think, so just in general, I think the idea of having a governing board and then having a TOC is a great idea. It's a model that works in our ecosystem, you know, this cloud native ecosystem, but I'm actually working on extending it to other realms entirely. I just think it's a very solid idea. But as far as the people and what's going on now, it's an interesting dynamic. You have all these companies out there trying to make money, and in a lot of cases these companies are competing. But what I find at the personal level, you have people that are working together to make it better, because at a personal level, you know, we don't want our peers to fail in any way. And I just love this model. And I think that there are going to be some warts. You know, we are definitely trailblazing here. But overall, I think we're heading in a great direction.
How do you make it reflective of the overall user base? So there's millions of people, you could argue billions at some point, who will be using, you know, who will be the end users of these technologies, and they'll come from all possible walks of life, right? So I'm curious on how that governing board, how that TOC will help foster the real, you know, the real capability to be able to serve those people out there who, you know, as you say, this is what we're talking about, is the, you know, is the foundation for the next, you know, several decades.
So one thing the TOC can do and does is get out of the way. So there's a principle in the European Union called subsidiarity, that every decision should be devolved down to the lowest level possible. And one of the things that's fascinating is that when you have a project like Kubernetes or Prometheus, or really any of our projects that are running quite well, the TOC does not get involved in governing them. They have a set of rules to say you need to have a governance process, it needs to be written down, it needs to be neutral, you need to follow it. And in principle, if one of these projects went completely awry, people could appeal to the TOC, and there's different ways that could get engaged. But the reality is that the most important function of the TOC today is a gatekeeping one, what projects come into CNCF and then how they move along, and then just making sure that they're getting the resources that they need from CNCF staff, so essentially an appeal point, and then just some guidance and counsel and a little help on the side. On the diversity front, I mean, the first thing that we can do is go find some of the biggest markets in the world that would not necessarily be well served by our existing events, and so that's the whole reason we're here in China. But we are looking to launch a whole set of events around the world that we'll hopefully be sharing with you over the next couple months, and would love to have the new stack there with us as we go to places like Seoul and Sydney and Latin America and a number of other places as well.
So I just want to add one more thing. I think that's the important thing, is that this is a parallel to, I guess, to VC land, where you are a smart person, you have an idea for a business, and you go raise money from venture capital. But a lot of times you're not just raising money, you're also working with people that show you how to run business. And I think that's something that the TOC is good for, just in general, is that how do we actually grow and nurture a tech project? It's not just writing software, you know, contrary to popular belief. And what I think the TOC can help with is like using the experience from the people that are currently on it. They can also provide these guidelines, say, hey, if you hit this checkpoint, this checkpoint, this checkpoint, chances are you will have some level of success. But please stay away from this whole area over here, unless you have really good reasons, because, you know, we're not all-knowing. But I think that's the best part. It's like technical oversight. It's not technical control or technical demand.
Right. So then let's talk then about kind of the organization and how it's set up, because there's different ways that the projects come through the process, right? There's the CNCF sandbox, correct? And then there's the incubation stage, right? And then there's the projects themselves, and then there's the graduation, right? What are, you know, I know the sandbox has been an experiment in many ways, because if you know, there was a point where you still do have to get the support of a TOC member. I think it's 2 TOC members. And previously, I mean, I think also there is some talk about going to 3. So how are you trying to, like, you know, what are some of the things you've learned from the sandbox process that you're thinking about, that you're seeing kind of today, and what we'll see kind of going forward in terms of like thinking about sustainability itself?
So I think, remember, CNCF was created in the end of 2015 in a lot of ways as a home for Kubernetes and then of complementary projects. And so one of the challenges of having a project like Kubernetes and then Prometheus and then FluentD and some others come in that were so mature, so well run, just such credible software, is that it set a very high bar.
That's interesting, isn't it?
And so suddenly there's other projects came in and said, hey, we would really like an opportunity to have neutral governance, to just even have a place to collaborate, particularly when you have multiple big companies that want to have a way of collaborating where none of them want to own the trademark. They want a neutral body to own it. And so the sandbox was a reaction to that. I believe it was Alexis Richardson, our original chairperson of our TOC, suggested it, and I remember that he felt strongly about the sandbox term. And we've had a little bit of calibration issues where one of the things that we've now set with the TOC is that CNCF doesn't provide marketing help for those sandbox projects. Now, they do get a session at KubeCon, which has a lot of value to them and helps them attract new users and such. But things that we do otherwise about tweets and press releases and announcements and such, they don't get that. But we've now also are very pleased that we've had multiple projects come out of the sandbox. So I believe Linkerd, CoreDNS, and most recently Harbor. And so Harbor is a project that was started here in China, came in the sandbox, and then just a few months later, in November, last year, moved to incubation. So I would say there's nothing magical about the levels. I mean, the TOC could decide to change them, or the voting rules are such at any time. But a lot of what we're doing is trying to do some external signaling to end users out there. We're saying, hey, if it's a graduated project, this is suitable for any enterprise of any kind. If it's incubating, we're saying, okay, this is incredibly promising. If you're willing to take on some responsibility, it's worth, you can run your business on this. But Sandbox is saying, no, this is more experimental. It's for techies. We're not making the same level of guarantees around it.
And I think that's important because there's two projects in the sandbox, particular Spiffy and Spire. These ideas they're great ideas. When we have applications, we want to know who we're talking to, and we want to be able to trust who we're talking to. But it's actually just a very hard problem. Simple idea, hard problem to solve. And I like that the sandbox is theirs because they have time to explore that whole realm of their problem before they decide this is the way they're going. By the time they hit incubation, they should say, well, this is how we're going to succeed. And Sandbox can provide that, that safeguards and provide that governance while they are trying to figure out where they are.
CoreDNS is an interesting project. It's one of the very few that's actually started by individuals as opposed to like organizations or corporate entities. How would you like to see that model evolve? Do you believe that you should continue to have that stress on the corporate sponsorship, or should there be more focus on finding individuals who can bring forward projects?
I'd say that one of the unique things about CNCF compared to, say, the Apache Software Foundation is that we don't pretend that corporations don't exist. So we, for example, have some rules that in order to move, I believe, to graduation, you need to have maintainers from more than one company. And that's something that the TOC takes very seriously. And that's, for example, not a rule in ASF. But with that said, I don't think that there's a sort of ideal model for a CNCF project, that it needs to just come from the brain of a genius, like breaking out of a Greek god's head, or it has to be 5. That would be helpful. Or it would have to be 5 companies coming together or anything else. I mean, what's nice is that I think at the end of the day, people are evaluating it based on the code and based on how well it works.
And then also, I mean, we need to be real here. And maintaining and sustaining software requires time and money and things like that. And in some cases, I can think of a couple of individual products that are super successful in their own realm. But you think about all the big projects that we're using, they're all corporate backed, and for better or for worse, but really for better, because these projects, because they are corporate backed, so in the web realm we have Angular and React. And then you have Vue, which is actually not.
Yeah.
Right. But right now they're actually going through this problem where Vue 3 might fork.
Right.
And so, I always hesitate when people are saying, we want less corporate involvement in this, but corporate budgets allow these projects
The
to
economics are
and like Kubernetes, we are very thankful to Google for what they allowed to happen, what they opened, because that really got us all here around this table talking right now. But there's other smaller projects that don't need that level, and I think that all these projects, whether they're big or small, should be able to exist. And depending on what the project needs, sometimes you just need corporate support.
Yep. one of the questions that comes up then is about then the process going forward. So are there any changes you make to the incubation process going forward? Are there any kind of thoughts you have about the graduated project, how you continue to support them? One of the things I think about is that burnout that can happen, right, with among maintainers, and we hear more about this topic, right? So are there ways that you're thinking of how you can, help create more sustainability so the maintainers don't get burned out and so that the projects do continue to live past that incubation stage?
I mean, CNCF provides a set of services that are designed to make project maintainers' lives easier. In no way are we doing the work for them. They're still the ones who have to evaluate every pull request and interact with their community and drive the project forward. If they want to do an update to their website or have some documentation help or all sorts of other things, we want to be able to help them with that. But the other reality of how essentially all successful projects run, and I wouldn't just say it's open source projects. I mean, I would sort of say over several hundred years, if you sort of say, how does science work? How does innovation work? There needs to be a process for some of the founding people to move to what we call emeritus status. Mm-hmm. And it's really useful. I mean, I believe the Kubernetes just started putting in the owner files who is moved to emeritus status, because you often can go ping them later and say, hey, why did you do it this way? Or what was the origin? But just realizing that you need to have a contributor ladder to continue to have your new users have a way of becoming contributors, move to reviewer, move to leader over time, and just realize that there has to be a constant refresh going on.
And this is the same progression that engineers find as they move through their career. You have engineers beginning out. Notice I didn't call them junior engineers. Mm-hmm. They're just engineers, where they are competent, can solve problems, but maybe own a little core, a little piece of the core. And then you have senior engineers that can navigate maybe multiple pieces of the core application. And then you have these engineers that have moved past seniors, so what are we calling them now, principal and staff. What they can do is they do two things. They can actually see the whole application move and then also look at the industry and how the application works in it. And it's the same thing for an open source project. You have to be able to realize how your open source project is growing and being able to move with that. And that includes looking at how it is being consumed and being processed by external. And then also something else, and you brought up burnout. We as an industry are starting to talk about it more, but I don't think people are still understanding it. But we have to realize that our software is just that. If it moves a little bit slower, so I can get a couple days of rest, 3 months, a year from now, we are way better off because I got that. So we just need to start talking about it more, and not in a way of we're victims, but in a way that we can actually make sure we never get there.
So are there projects out there that you look to as examples, as model examples of like helping kind of bring out to bring sustainability as an issue to the forefront, in particular related to how we can think about the individual's health?
Yeah, a good example, and I'm pulling this one from a little bit back on the Ruby on Rails project. Back in 2006, I was involved.
It turns out we were both at RailsConf
Yes.
in 2006, but did not actually meet each other.
Yeah, so I was involved, and what I've noticed throughout the years, I don't do any Rails development or even really touch Ruby, but I'm always interested in the community. But what I've noticed is that, you had David Hannemeyer Hansen, he's leading it, and he's ebbing and flowing. Mm-hmm. But you have different leaders over time who come and basically take the reins. And then they get enough, and they basically have grown the people behind them, and then when they're tired, they come take the reins. And then another person comes and takes the reins. I like that model, and I've seen maybe 6 or 7 generations of just great leaders over there. And the project it's interesting because maybe that model is not sustainable in the future. I'm talking about this Rails in general, but I think that model of how they're running the project is super sustainable, and people should pay attention. And it differs from a project like Kubernetes. Kubernetes is way bigger than that. So Kubernetes is like 100 projects in one. But I think as SIGs mature and what they'll find, and with working with specifically in Kubernetes like SIG Arch, what they'll find is that they'll find their rhythm and be able to make sure that they can hit the cadences they want.
Any projects that you would cite?
I might just give a quick shout out for KubeCon, CloudNativeCon, and particularly Aaron Krickenberger, but over a dozen people in Seattle just described the experience as overwhelming. And there were a couple things that were contributing to that. We were a little too big for the venue, and so in terms of like places to sit down and noise, and the fact that we couldn't close the sponsor showcase during keynotes, which is we normally like to do, because it gives people who are working the booth time to rest, and there just wasn't enough place. So we had reasons for it, but we took the feedback very seriously. And I was glad that in Barcelona, and you'll see it again in San Diego, that we had a mental health and open source booth. We had a speaker on it. It was a constant topic that we really wanted to say, hey, this is something serious, that you're not the only one out there feeling overwhelmed or exhausted by this, and there's a lot of ways that we can help you deal with that.
And just a little plug, there was a talk, I think it was the last session in Barcelona. It was Aaron and Stephen Augustus, and
There was a panel.
and then Ashley McNamara. And I encourage people to go watch that. And what I want you to get out of it is understand the feelings, and then understand that you're not alone, and then go figure out how to cope with it. Don't do don't do it in the other order.
Yeah.
You'll kill yourself.
And that's so hard, isn't it? I mean, because I think everyone kind of feels alone in some way, but to actually get out there and, and talk to people about it, that's important. One of the questions I do have is about, this question comes up about biases and and how they have been present in communities, for a long time. And one of the questions is about selecting maintainers. And how do you think about the process of selecting maintainers so they do represent really that, they represent the overall community? The question is, how can we also help empower underrepresented minorities in tech, to become maintainers of open source software projects?
I have an idea, because we did it. In Barcelona, there's Nikita, young lady from India. Actually, she was just doing her internships last year, and now she works at Lutza in Sweden. I believe that's where it is.
Germany, but she's still working out of India.
Yeah, she's still working out of India. She came in and started basically looking at what she could do, and then she learned about what she was working on and started doing more. She is now a Kubernetes maintainer. I think that the reason I bring her up is because, first of all, she's a she, and she's brown, and she's from a country that is still developing and trying to figure out where they are. She's figured out a great model that I think a lot of people could actually follow in. It's what we need to do is it's funny. I had a conversation with someone at Kubernetes about this. It's not ability, it's opportunity. And what we need to do, as whether it's CNCF or me working for a pretty large company, is we need to make more opportunities available. Because what we find is we like to select people that look like us, who think like us, and that's just human bias, and that's something that we all need to improve on. But when we start making more opportunities, what we'll find is that people who we don't expect will be in those positions will actually come fill those opportunities.
It opens new dimensions.
Yeah, and it's better than saying that, hey, I can fix this. What I'm going to do is just make more opportunities for people to be successful. I'm not going to say what they have to do. I'm not going to say who it is, but I'm going to be loud about it. And this world is huge. It took me 26 hours to fly here. There's a lot of people I flew over. What we need to do is just make those opportunities available, and we are. CNCF has the scholarships. Companies are making better efforts now to get people who don't look like what the status quo is to do these things. And I say this as a black dude. I see it. Is it great? No, but we got to start somewhere, and then we got to evaluate and then figure out how we can do better in the future.
That's great.
I'll just give one quick shout out.
Yeah.
The diversity scholarship for KubeCon, CloudNativeCon San Diego is open right now. It's kubecon.io. We've funded not just the registration, but travel and hotel from all over the world of over 300 people over the last 2 years. And we're actually working on a blog post where there are well over a dozen of them have then gone on to become speakers at KubeCon, or in Nikita's case, keynote speakers and many of them have moved from challenges in their careers into really well-paying jobs. So we're incredibly excited to keep that pipeline going and to expand it.
I guess my last question is about non-English speakers, and we're here in China, and the question: how is the organization, the CNCF, trying to be more inclusive of non-English speakers? Because often, that's a big question, especially as as we see here in Shanghai.
So CNCF has a fully paid staff member, Zach, who's down at the Kubernetes Contributor Summit right now doing a doc sprint. And for example, we have 2 people here from Indonesia who are now kicking off the effort to translate the Kubernetes documentation into Indonesian, or one of the Indonesian languages, that to make it accessible there. Now, the reality is that for technology today, English is the lingua franca for development. And so to move up the contributor ladder, people are going to need to learn at least a technical level of English in terms of being able to operate over mailing lists and that kind of thing. But we absolutely think we can lower the bar, and you now see Kubernetes documentation in particular available in Chinese, in Japanese, in Spanish, and it's expanding into more languages. So we're thrilled to make that on-ramp easier.
Yeah, and this is hard. I'm a native English speaker, but what I find is that it goes back to this opportunity thing. So whenever we actually interview every single keynote speaker before they get on stage, not to just hear their talk, but to give them insight and say, hey, did you think about this? Do you need help here? One of the speakers for China asked me, said, can I give this talk in Chinese? And I thought that was a crazy question, because I said, we're in China. You give that talk in whatever language makes you feel good. And really what we need to do is, when we have those opportunities to allow people to express themselves in their language when they're talking to people who are like them, let's do that. But also, we hit every single continent really, except for the continent of Africa. We also need to do things like that for them as well.
Yeah.
And I don't have the answers. It's crazy, but I don't have the answers. But I do want to highlight that we do need to find the answers, and maybe someone listening today can ping me and say, I have an answer.
But there's also, speaking in Kubernetes language, there's a desired state, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to have this desired state, right? And so like having that desired state, it becomes like an iterative process then to reach that desired
That's
state.
a good model, Al.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Good analogy. A plus.
Well, on that note, thank you guys so much for participating in this first discussion we're having here at KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon Open Source Summit in Shanghai, China. Have a great show, and we look forward to talking soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.